My son charged me $5,000 a month in rent. I was working 3 jobs while he and my daughter-in-law relaxed. One night, I broke a plate and she screamed, "You're a useless old woman." In that moment, I decided to abandon them. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Della, and at 63, I thought I knew what exhaustion felt like. I was wrong. The alarm buzzed at 4:30 a.m., just like every morning for the past 8 months. My joints protested as I rolled out of the narrow twin bed in what used to be Randall's childhood room. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sleeping in my son's old bed while he and his wife Ophelia occupied the master suite of the house I'd been paying for. $5,000 a month. That's what my own son charged me for rent in my own home, the home I'd mortgage-free given to him when his father died 3 years ago. I told myself it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet after Harold's medical bills wiped out our savings. But temporary had stretched into nearly a year of working 3 jobs, while my son and his wife lived comfortably off my labor. I stumbled to the kitchen in the dark, careful not to wake them. Ophelia had made it clear that any noise before 8 a.m. was inconsiderate and selfish. The coffee maker gurgled to life as I mechanically prepared for another day that would start at the grocery store at 6 a.m., continue with cleaning houses until 3 p.m., and end with my evening shift at the diner until midnight. My reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman I barely recognized. Deep circles shadowed my eyes, and my once full cheeks had hollowed out from stress and exhaustion. When had I become this ghost of myself? "Della," Ophelia's shrill voice cut through my thoughts. "The coffee maker is too loud." I glanced at the clock, 5:15 a.m. She wasn't even supposed to be awake. I turned off the machine and poured the half-brewed coffee into my travel mug. It would have to do. By 5:30, I was in my 12-year-old Honda, another thing Ophelia complained about. "It makes the neighborhood look poor," she'd said, as if the woman who hadn't worked a day since marrying my son had any right to judge my car. The grocery store shift flew by in a blur of scanning barcodes and fake smiles for customers who barely acknowledged my existence. Mrs. Patterson, my supervisor, noticed me swaying on my feet during my break. "Della, honey, you look ready to drop. Maybe you should take a sick day." I shook my head. I couldn't afford to miss a single shift. The math was brutal, but simple. 3 jobs barely covered Randall's rent demand, plus my own expenses. 1 missed day meant choosing between gas to get to work or food to eat. The house cleaning went no better. My second client, Mrs. Rodriguez, kept having to repeat instructions because I was too tired to focus. My hands shook as I folded her laundry, and I knocked over a small plant while dusting. Nothing broke, but the embarrassment burned in my chest. By the time I dragged myself home at 4 p.m., my legs felt like lead. I had exactly 1 hour before my diner shift, barely enough time to shower and maybe grab a quick sandwich. The house was silent when I entered, which should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt ominous. Randall's car was in the driveway, but I could hear muffled laughter from upstairs. They were probably watching movies in bed while I worked myself to death to pay their bills. I headed to the kitchen to make a quick peanut butter sandwich when I saw it. A stack of takeout containers from Romano's, the expensive Italian place across town. The receipt lay crumpled beside them. $127. $43 for 2 people. My hands trembled as I stared at that number. $127. That was more than I made in an entire day at the grocery store. They'd spent my money I'd earned scrubbing other people's toilets and serving coffee to rude customers, on a single meal. I was reaching for the peanut butter jar when my exhausted fingers betrayed me. The ceramic plate I'd grabbed slipped from my grip and crashed to the floor, shattering into a dozen pieces. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Within seconds, I heard thundering footsteps on the stairs. What the hell was that? Randall appeared in the kitchen doorway, his hair disheveled from his afternoon nap. "I'm sorry, I began, already kneeling to collect the pieces with shaking hands. "Jesus, Mom! Be more careful!" He ran his hands through his hair in exasperation. That was from the good set. Before I could apologize again, Ophelia swept into the kitchen wearing a silk robe that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Her perfectly manicured nails gleamed as she surveyed the mess with disgust. Seriously? She placed her hands on her hips, her voice dripping with contempt. We can't even have one peaceful afternoon without you breaking something. I continued gathering the shards, a piece cutting into my palm. A drop of blood hit the tile, but I kept picking up the pieces. I'll replace it. I'm sorry. Ophelia laughed, but there was no warmth in it. Replace it? With what money? You can barely keep up with rent as it is. The words hit me like a physical blow. I looked up at my son, waiting for him to defend me, to tell his wife she'd gone too far. Instead, Randall avoided my eyes and crossed his arms. She's right, Mom. You need to be more careful. We can't afford to keep replacing things you break. Something cold settled in my chest. We can't afford it? I was the only one working in this house. Ophelia stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss that somehow felt more violent than screaming. You're nothing but a clumsy old woman who can't even handle simple tasks anymore. She paused, making sure her next words would hit their mark. You're a useless old woman. And frankly, we're tired of cleaning up your messes. The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock. Randall said nothing. He just stood there, letting his wife destroy what was left of my dignity. I rose slowly from the floor, my knees protesting, the ceramic shards still clutched in my bleeding palm. For a moment, I stared at them both, my son who had become a stranger and the woman who had turned him against me. You're right, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. I am tired of making messes. I walked past them both, ignoring Ophelia's satisfied smirk and Randall's uncomfortable silence. In my small room, I pulled out my old suitcase from under the bed. My hands moved with purpose now, packing only what I truly needed. Clothes, medications, the few photographs that still meant something to me. It was 11:30 p.m. when I finished my diner shift. The house was dark when I returned, Randall and Ophelia long since asleep in their comfortable bed, in their comfortable life, paid for by my blood and sweat. I moved like a ghost through the house, gathering the last of my belongings. On the kitchen table, I left an envelope with the rent money I'd already set aside for next week. Let them have it. It would be the last money they'd ever see from me. As I loaded my car in the darkness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. The night air felt crisp against my skin as I took one last look at the house that had become my prison. I didn't leave a note. What was there to say to people who saw me as nothing more than a source of income? Instead, I simply drove away, leaving behind the son who had forgotten how to love me and the life that had nearly killed me. For the first time in 8 months, I was going somewhere Ophelia's voice couldn't reach me. The motel room smelled of industrial disinfectant and decades of other people's troubles, but to me, it felt like freedom. I sat on the edge of the bed at 2 a.m., still in my diner uniform, staring at the phone number I'd written on a napkin 3 weeks ago. Margaret from the diner had mentioned her friend's mother-in-law had a small apartment for rent. Clean, quiet, and the landlord doesn't ask too many questions if you pay on time, she'd said. At the time, I'd tucked the information away, not daring to hope I'd ever have the courage to use it. But courage, I was learning, sometimes looks like desperation wearing a brave face. I dialed the number, praying someone would answer at this ungodly hour. On the 4th ring, a gruff voice picked up. Yeah? Hi. I'm calling about the apartment for rent? Margaret Rodriguez gave me this number. There was a pause. Lady, it's 2 a.m. I know, and I'm sorry. I need a place to live, and I can pay first month's rent in cash right now. Another pause. Longer this time. You running from something? The question caught me off guard with its directness. Not something, someone, my family. His voice softened slightly. Been there. Meet me at 412 Maple Street in the morning. 8 o'clock. Bring first month's rent and a security deposit. $500 each. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, hardly believing I'd just found a place to live in the middle of the night. $1,000 would take most of my savings, but it was worth it. It was worth everything. I spent the rest of the night in that motel room, alternating between pacing and sitting in the single chair, watching the clock creep toward morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ophelia's voice. You're a useless old woman. But for the first time in months, those words felt like someone else's problem. At 8 a.m. sharp, I stood outside 412 Maple Street, cash envelope in hand. The building was older but well-maintained, with a small garden in front that someone clearly cared for. A heavy-set man in his 60s emerged from the first-floor unit. You the lady from last night? Yes, sir. Della Morrison. He looked me up and down, taking in my worn jeans and the exhaustion I was sure showed in my face. Frank Gutierrez. You look like someone who's been through it. Something like that. He led me up a narrow staircase to a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor. It wasn't much. A living room barely big enough for a couch and coffee table, a kitchen with outdated appliances, a bedroom that would fit a double bed and a dresser. But it had large windows that let in morning sunlight, and most importantly, it was mine. It's perfect, I said, meaning every word. Frank handed me the keys. First rule, what happens in your apartment stays in your apartment. I don't get involved in tenants' personal business. Second rule, rent's due on the first, no exceptions. Third rule, you take care of this place, it takes care of you. I paid him the cash and signed a simple lease agreement. No credit check, no references, just a handshake deal with a man who understood that sometimes people need a fresh start without explanations. By noon, I'd bought basic necessities, an air mattress, some sheets, a few dishes, and groceries that I chose for myself, without worrying about what Randall liked or what Ophelia would criticize. When was the last time I'd bought myself ice cream simply because I wanted it? I was arranging my few belongings when my phone rang. The screen showed Randall's number and my stomach clenched. They'd discovered I was gone. The phone rang again. And again. I turned the volume off but watched as call after call came through. By evening, I'd received 38 calls from various numbers. Randall, Ophelia, even numbers I didn't recognize, probably friends they'd enlisted to help track me down. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sat on my air mattress in my empty apartment, eating ice cream straight from the container and feeling more at peace than I had in months. The silence was beautiful. No Ophelia complaining about the coffee maker, no demands for rent money, no one calling me useless. The voicemails started coming around dinner time. I didn't listen to most of them, but curiosity got the better of me with a few. Randall's voice, strained and angry. Mom, where the hell are you? Call me back right now. This is ridiculous. Ophelia, trying to sound concerned but failing. Della, sweetie, we're worried about you. Come home so we can talk about this. Then Randall again, panic creeping into his voice. Mom, seriously, where are you? I drove by all your jobs. Nobody's seen you. Just call me back, okay? I deleted each message without listening to the end. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about their meal ticket. The next morning, I called Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store and Mr. Chen at the diner to quit my jobs there. I'd keep the house cleaning business since I could set my own schedule, and the work was manageable for someone my age. For the first time in months, I wouldn't have to wake up at 4:30 a.m. Around noon, as I was hanging some curtains I'd found at a thrift store, I heard heavy footsteps on the stairs. My heart rate spiked, but when I peeked through the peephole, it wasn't Randall. It was Frank. He knocked gently. Mrs. Morrison, you okay in there? There's been some guy driving around asking questions about new tenants. I opened the door, not bothering to hide my concern. What kind of questions? Description matches you. Says he's looking for his mother. Frank's expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Told him I don't know nothing about nobody's mother, but thought you should know. Thank you, I said, meaning it more than he could know. Frank nodded and turned to leave, then paused. My own kids tried to put me in a home when my wife died, said I couldn't take care of myself. He looked back at me. Sometimes family ain't who you're related to. Sometimes it's who respects you enough to let you live your own life. That evening, I sat in my small living room with a cup of tea, the good kind I'd never been able to afford when I was paying Randall's rent, and looked out my window at the street below. My phone showed 43 missed calls now, but the number had stopped climbing. Maybe they were finally getting the message. Or maybe they were planning something else. The thought should have scared me, but instead, I felt a strange calm. For the first time in nearly a year, I was in control of my own life. I had a roof over my head that I could afford, work that didn't kill me, and silence that belonged to me. Whatever Randall and Ophelia did next, they'd have to do it without me bankrolling their comfortable life. I'd spent 63 years taking care of other people, and I was done. It was time to take care of myself. 2 weeks into my new life, I was folding Mrs. Chen's laundry when she mentioned seeing a for sale sign go up on a house in her neighborhood. She described the address, and my hands stilled on the towel I was holding. It was Randall's house. My old house. The realtor said the owners are behind on their mortgage, Mrs. Chen continued, not knowing she was talking about my son. Such a shame. It's a beautiful house, but I heard they're asking way more than it's worth in this market. I finished the laundry in silence, my mind racing. 2 weeks without my rent money and they were already trying to sell? Either their financial situation was far worse than I'd realized, or they'd been living so far beyond their means that losing my income was catastrophic. That evening, curiosity got the better of me. I drove past the house for the first time since I'd left. The for sale sign stood crooked in the overgrown front lawn. The grass needed cutting, the flower beds were full of weeds, and newspapers were scattered across the driveway. The house looked abandoned, neglected, just like I had been. My phone had finally stopped ringing constantly, down to maybe 3 or 4 calls a day that I continued to ignore. But that night, as I sat in my small apartment eating a dinner I'd actually enjoyed cooking, the phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Randall's number. It was my neighbor from the old house, Betty. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Della?" "Oh, honey, I'm so glad you picked up." Betty's voice was thick with concern. "I've been worried sick about you." "I'm fine, Betty. Actually, I'm better than fine." "But where are you? Randall's been beside himself looking for you. He came by asking if I'd seen you, and he looked terrible. Lost weight, dark circles under his eyes. A year ago, that news would have sent me racing back to take care of him. Now, I felt nothing but a mild curiosity about what he was telling the neighbors. "What exactly did he tell you?" I asked. Betty hesitated. "He said you'd been acting strange lately, and he was worried about your mental health. He said you just disappeared without a word and they're afraid you might hurt yourself." The audacity took my breath away. After charging me $5,000 a month and letting his wife call me useless, he was now painting me as mentally unstable to explain my absence. "Betty," I said carefully, "did Randall mention that he was charging me $5,000 a month to live in my own house? The house I gave him free and clear?" Silence. "Did he tell you I was working 3 jobs to pay that rent while he and Ophelia didn't work at all?" "Della, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't, because that version of the story doesn't make Randall look like the concerned son." After I hung up with Betty, I sat in my quiet apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Genuine amusement. Randall was scrambling, creating stories to preserve his image while his world fell apart. The next few days brought more revelations. Mrs. Rodriguez, one of my cleaning clients, mentioned that her daughter worked at the bank where Randall and Ophelia had their mortgage. "She probably shouldn't have told me this," Mrs. Rodriguez said conspiratorially. "But your son came in last week practically begging for a payment extension. My daughter said his wife was with him crying and carrying on about family emergencies. Family emergencies, that's what they were calling my refusal to finance their lifestyle. The bank gave them 30 days, she continued, but between you and me, I don't think they're going to find that kind of money. The payment is over $4,000 a month." I did quick math in my head. Their mortgage payment was almost as much as the rent they'd been charging me. No wonder they'd been so desperate to keep me trapped. A week later, I was grocery shopping when I literally ran into Ophelia at the checkout line. She looked nothing like the perfectly put-together woman who'd called me useless. Her designer clothes were wrinkled, her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she had dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She saw me before I could escape, and her face went through a series of emotions. surprise, relief, then calculation. Della! She rushed over, suddenly all smiles and concern. We've been so worried about you. Where have you been staying? I kept loading my groceries onto the conveyor belt, not bothering to hide my irritation. Somewhere I don't have to pay $5,000 a month for the privilege of being insulted. Her face flushed. Look, maybe we all said some things we didn't mean. Randall's been sick with worry. He barely sleeps anymore. I turned to face her fully, noting how she avoided eye contact. Is that before or after you put the house up for sale? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Who told you about that? Word gets around, especially when you're asking twice what the house is worth. Ophelia's mask slipped completely. The fake concern disappeared, replaced by the cold desperation I recognized from our last encounter. You can't just abandon your family over one little argument, she hissed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Randall is your son. You have responsibilities. You're right, I said calmly. I do have responsibilities. To myself. I paid for my groceries and walked away, leaving her standing there with her mouth open. In my car, I sat for a moment, hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline, but underneath the nervousness was something stronger, pride. I'd stood up to her, and it felt incredible. That night, the phone calls started again. Randall, Ophelia, numbers I didn't recognize. I let them all go to voicemail, but this time I listened to a few. Randall's voice was different now, less angry, more pleading. Mom, please, we need to talk. I know things got out of hand, but we're family. Families work through problems together. Ophelia, trying a different tactic. Della, I want to apologize for what I said. I was stressed about money, and I took it out on you. It wasn't fair. Please come home so we can fix this. Then Randall again, and I could hear tears in his voice. Mom, I don't know what to do. Everything's falling apart. I can't lose the house. Please. Just call me back. For a moment. Just a moment. I felt the old tug of maternal instinct. The urge to fix his problems, to sacrifice myself to make his life easier. But then I remembered the takeout containers worth more than my daily wages. I remembered being called useless. I remembered working myself to exhaustion while they slept until noon. I deleted the messages and made myself a cup of tea. 2 days later, Frank knocked on my door with a concerned expression. Mrs. Morrison, that son of yours, was here again. This time he had some woman with him, crying and carrying on. They wanted to know which apartment you were in. My stomach tightened. Did you tell them? Hell no. Told them the same thing I told them before. I don't know nothing about nobody. But they're getting more desperate. The woman was talking about calling the police, saying you might be having some kind of breakdown. I sank into my chair, suddenly exhausted. They're trying to make me sound crazy, so people will force me to go back. Frank nodded grimly. Seen it before. Family members who don't like it when someone stops enabling their bad behavior. They'll try anything to get their cash cow back. That phrase hit me like a cold slap. Cash cow. That's exactly what I'd been to them. Not a mother, not a family member, just a source of money that had suddenly dried up. What should I do? I asked. Frank thought for a moment. You got any proof of what they were doing to you? Documentation? I nodded, thinking of the bank statements showing my rent payments, the records of my 3 jobs, the receipts for things I'd bought for their house. Keep all that safe, he said. And maybe it's time to make sure they can't use your absence against you. You might want to document that you're fine, making your own choices. That evening, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to Randall or Ophelia, but to Betty and a few other neighbors who knew me well. I explained my situation clearly and calmly, providing my new address and phone number, and asked them to serve as witnesses that I was safe and mentally competent. As I sealed the envelopes, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just running away anymore. I was taking control, protecting myself, and making sure that Randall and Ophelia's desperate attempts to manipulate the situation couldn't succeed. They wanted to paint me as a confused old woman who needed to be rescued from herself. Instead, I was going to prove that I was exactly where I belonged, free from their manipulation and finally living for myself. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt like I might actually win. The revelation came from the most unexpected source, Randall's ex-girlfriend from college. I was at the small coffee shop down the street from my apartment, treating myself to a latte and a newspaper. simple pleasures I'd forgotten existed, when a woman approached my table tentatively. "Excuse me, are you Mrs. Morrison? Randall's mother?" I looked up to see a woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and an uncertain smile. Something about her seemed familiar, though I couldn't place her. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "I'm Sarah Mitchell. Well, Sarah Williams now. I dated Randall in college." She gestured to the empty chair. "May I sit? I heard about what's been happening, and I think there are some things you should know." My first instinct was to politely decline. The last thing I needed was to get pulled into more drama. But something in her expression, a mix of concern and determination, made me nod. Sarah sat down and immediately began talking, as if she'd been rehearsing this conversation. "I heard through mutual friends that you'd left, and that Randall was telling people you were having mental health issues." She paused, studying my face. "But Mrs. Morrison, I remember you from college. You were always so sharp, so together. That's not the story that makes sense to me." "What story does make sense to you?" Sarah took a deep breath. "The story where Randall learned to manipulate the people who love him to get what he wants. Because that's exactly what he did to me." Over the next hour, Sarah told me things about my son that made my blood run cold. How he'd convinced her to take out student loans in her name to pay for his expenses. How he'd isolated her from her friends by creating drama, and then positioning himself as her only support. How he'd made her feel guilty for wanting to spend money on herself instead of on him. The final straw was when he tried to get me to ask my parents for money for a business investment that turned out to be a gambling debt, she said. When I refused, he told me I didn't really love him, that I was selfish and unsupportive. "He was gambling in college?" I asked, though part of me wasn't surprised. "Constantly. Poker games, sports betting, even some online stuff. But he was good at hiding it, and even better at making other people pay for it." Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "Mrs. Morrison, I'm so sorry. When I heard he was charging you rent to live in your own house, and that his wife was calling you names, it was like seeing my own story played out all over again." After Sarah left, I sat in that coffee shop for another 2 hours, my mind reeling. My son, the boy I'd raised to be honest and hardworking, had been manipulating and using people for over a decade, and I'd been his latest victim. That evening, I decided to do something I'd been avoiding. I drove past the house again. This time, I noticed things I'd missed before. The lawn service truck I'd been paying for was nowhere to be seen, and the yard looked even worse. But there was something else. A luxury SUV in the driveway I didn't recognize. On impulse, I parked across the street and waited. 20 minutes later, Ophelia emerged from the house with a man I'd never seen before. They kissed passionately before he got into the SUV and drove away. My son's wife was having an affair, and judging by the expensive car and the designer watch I'd glimpsed on the man's wrist, her boyfriend had money. The pieces began falling into place. Ophelia's sudden interest in expensive dinners, her designer clothes that kept appearing even when money was supposedly tight, the way she'd pushed Randall to charge me more rent, claiming they needed it for household expenses. I sat in my car, watching the house where I'd been so miserable, and felt something unexpected. Pity, not for myself, but for Randall. His wife was cheating on him, his financial house of cards was collapsing, and he was too deep in his own problems to see any of it clearly. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Margaret in Phoenix. "Della, oh my God, I've been wondering how you've been. It's been 2 years since we talked?" Something like that. I'd been too ashamed to stay in touch with my family while I was being financially drained by my son. "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. When Randall was younger, did you ever notice anything concerning about his behavior?" There was a long pause. "Della, honey, why are you asking?" "Please, it's important." Margaret sighed. "You want the truth?" "Yes. I always thought there was something off about how he treated you. Even as a teenager, he seemed to know exactly how to make you feel guilty to get what he wanted. And the way he talked about money like everyone owed him something. Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because you were so proud of him, and he was your only child. I figured it wasn't my place." "But Della, some of the things he said to you at family gatherings, they made me uncomfortable. After we hung up, I realized that people had been seeing the problem for years, but I'd been too close to it, too invested in being a good mother, to recognize that my son was using my love against me. That afternoon, I was cleaning Mrs. Patterson's house when she mentioned that her grandson worked at the casino on the other side of town. He was telling me about some regular customers who come in and lose thousands every week, she said while I vacuumed her living room. One couple in particular, he described them, and I swear it sounded like that young man who's been driving around asking people about his missing mother. My hands stilled on the vacuum handle. What did he say about them? Well, the man plays poker mostly, loses big consistently. But here's the strange part. When he wins, it's the woman who collects the money, and she never sticks around to watch him play. My grandson thinks she's using the husband's gambling as a way to launder money from somewhere else. The vacuum suddenly felt heavy in my hands. Ophelia wasn't just cheating on Randall. She was using his gambling addiction as a front for something else entirely. Whether it was money from her affair or some other scheme, she was playing a much more complex game than I'd realized. That evening, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I called Betty, my old neighbor. Betty, it's Della. I need to ask you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. Of course, honey. What do you need? I need you to keep an eye on my old house. If you see Randall leave alone, without Ophelia, I need you to call me immediately. Della, what's going on? I can't explain everything right now. But Randall is in more trouble than he knows, and I think it's time someone told him the truth about his wife. 3 days later, Betty called. Randall had just left alone, looking haggard and defeated. She'd overheard him on the phone in his driveway, and it sounded like he was begging someone for a loan extension. I drove to the house, my heart pounding. I'd avoided this confrontation for over a month, but I couldn't let my son destroy himself completely, even if he'd been willing to let me destroy myself for his benefit. I knocked on the door, and when Ophelia answered, her face went through a range of emotions: surprise, calculation, then false relief. Della, thank God you're okay. Randall's been so worried. Where is he? He had to run some errands. But come in, please. We have so much to talk about. I stepped into the house that used to be my home, noting how different it felt. The expensive furniture I'd helped pay for was still there, but there was an emptiness to the place, a sense of things falling apart beneath the surface. Can I get you some coffee? Ophelia asked, switching to her most charming voice. I know about Marcus. Her face went completely white. I don't know what you're talking about. The man with the expensive SUV who was here 3 nights ago? The one you kissed in the driveway while your husband was probably at the casino losing money you need for the mortgage. Ophelia's mask finally slipped completely. Gone was any pretense of caring about family or being worried about my well-being. What remained was cold calculation and barely controlled panic. How long have you been watching us? Long enough to know that you've been using my son's gambling addiction to cover up your affair, and probably to move money around from your boyfriend. Ophelia sat down heavily, suddenly looking much older than her 32 years. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. For a moment, I thought she might actually tell me the truth, but then her expression hardened, and I saw the woman who had called me useless, who had made my life a living hell while I paid for her comfort. You want to know the truth, Della? Fine. Yes, I'm seeing Marcus. Yes, he has money. And yes, he's been helping us with some expenses. But you know what else is true? Your son is a compulsive gambler who's been lying to you for years about how bad his debts are. The words hit me like physical blows, but I kept my expression neutral. Randall owes money to people who don't accept payment plans, she continued viciously. The house is just the beginning. If we don't figure something out soon, we're going to lose everything, and it might not be safe for any of us. And you thought the solution was to bleed me dry? You're his mother. You're supposed to take care of your children. I stood up, feeling calmer than I had in months. No, Ophelia, I'm supposed to love my children. I'm not supposed to enable them to destroy themselves and take me down with them. I walked toward the door, but turned back one more time. When Randall gets home, tell him his mother loves him, but tell him that if he wants my help, he needs to get help first. Real help. And he needs to decide whether he wants to save his marriage to you or save himself, because he can't do both. I left her sitting there in the house I'd paid for, surrounded by the expensive things my money had bought, finally understanding that her meal ticket was never coming back. Randall appeared at my apartment door at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday, looking like he hadn't slept in weeks. His hair was unwashed, his clothes wrinkled, and his eyes held a desperation I'd never seen before. When I opened the door, he nearly collapsed against the frame. "Mom," he said, his voice breaking on the single word. I stood there for a long moment, taking in the sight of my son, really looking at him for the first time in months. Beneath the stubble and exhaustion, I could see the boy I'd raised, but also something else, the hollow look of someone who'd finally hit rock bottom. "How did you find me?" "It doesn't matter." He ran his hands through his greasy hair. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Please." Every instinct I'd developed over the past 6 weeks told me to close the door. I'd worked too hard for my peace of mind to let him destroy it in one conversation. But something in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged, the tremor in his hands, made me step aside. "You have 10 minutes. He shuffled into my small living room, his eyes taking in the modest space. I saw him notice the single coffee cup on my table, the book I'd been reading, the small plant I'd bought myself the week before. It was the first time he'd seen me living for myself instead of for him. "This is where you've been?" he asked, sitting heavily on my second-hand couch. "This is where I live now. There's a difference." Randall looked around again, and I could see him trying to process the reality of my new life. No expensive furniture bought with money I couldn't afford. No stress about making rent payments that left me choosing between food and gas. Just a small, peaceful space that belonged entirely to me. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words came out in a rush. "I'm sorry about the rent, about Ophelia, about everything. I know we treated you badly, and I know you have every right to hate me." I sat down across from him, keeping my voice steady. "I don't hate you, Randall, but I also don't trust you." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. "I deserve that." "Yes, you do." For several minutes, we sat in silence. I could hear the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen, the sound of morning traffic outside my windows, the normal sounds of a life that didn't revolve around crisis and manipulation. "Ophelia told me about your conversation yesterday," he finally said. "Did she tell you all of it?" Randall's jaw tightened. "She told me you know about Marcus. And she said you threatened to expose everything unless we left you alone." I almost laughed. Even in defeat, Ophelia was still manipulating the narrative. "Is that what you think happened?" Randall looked up at me, confusion clear in his bloodshot eyes. "Didn't it?" "No, Randall. I told her that if you wanted my help, you needed to get help first. Real help. And that you needed to decide whether you wanted to save your marriage or save yourself." His face crumpled. "I can't do both, can I?" The admission hung in the air between us. For the first time in years, my son was asking me a genuine question, instead of trying to manipulate me into giving him what he wanted. "What do you think?" Randall leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. "I think I've lost everything. The house, my marriage, my mother. I think I've been so focused on trying to keep all the plates spinning that I never stopped to ask why I was spinning them in the first place." "Why were you?" He was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "Because I was scared. After Dad died, and you were struggling so much with the medical bills, I felt like I had to be the man of the family. I had to take care of everything, but I didn't know how. And every time I tried to fix one problem, I created 2 more. I felt a familiar tug in my chest, the urge to comfort him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, to take responsibility for his pain. But I'd learned to recognize that feeling now, and I stayed silent. "The gambling started as a way to make quick money to help with Dad's bills," he continued. "Just small bets, you know. But when I won, it felt like I was finally good at something. Like I was finally solving problems instead of creating them." "And when you lost?" "When I lost, I told myself it was just bad luck, that the next bet would be the one that fixed everything." He laughed bitterly. "Do you know how much money I've lost over the past 3 years, Mom?" I shook my head, though I was beginning to suspect the number would be staggering. $87,000. That's not counting what we borrowed against the house, or the credit cards, or— He trailed off, staring at his hands. Or the $5,000 a month I was taking from you. The number hit me like a physical blow. $87,000. More than I'd made in 2 years working 3 jobs. Where did Ophelia fit into all this? Randall's expression darkened. At first, she was supportive. She said she understood that I was under pressure, that the gambling was just a phase. But then she started encouraging it. She'd give me money for bigger bets, saying we needed a big win to get out of debt. Money from Marcus? He nodded miserably. She met him at the casino about 8 months ago. He was there watching me lose at poker, and afterwards, he approached her. Said he understood what it was like to be married to someone with an addiction. And you believed that? I wanted to believe it. Marcus seemed genuinely concerned about helping us get back on our feet. He started giving Ophelia money to invest in my gambling, but really it was just more money for me to lose. I could see the whole sick system now. Marcus was paying to have access to Ophelia, disguising it as charity for her gambling-addicted husband. Ophelia was getting money and attention from a wealthy man while maintaining the moral high ground of standing by her troubled husband. And Randall was getting enough money to continue his addiction, while everyone told him how much they cared about helping him. When did you figure out what was really going on? Yesterday, after you left. Randall wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I came home and found them together. Not just talking. Together. The pain in his voice was raw and real, and for a moment, I felt genuinely sorry for him. But sympathy and enabling weren't the same thing. What did you do? I told them both to get out of my house. Ophelia laughed and said it wasn't my house anymore, that Marcus had been making the mortgage payments for the past 4 months. He looked up at me with hollow eyes. She said if I kicked her out, Marcus would foreclose immediately. So she's been using you this whole time. We've all been using each other, Mom. Ophelia used me to justify taking Marcus's money. I used you to pay for everything else. Marcus used both of us to get what he wanted from Ophelia. He paused. The only person who wasn't using anybody was you, and we treated you the worst of all. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd built my new life. Behind me, I could hear Randall crying, not the manipulative tears I'd seen so many times before, but the broken sobs of someone who'd finally seen himself clearly. What do you want from me, Randall? I want my mom back, he whispered. I want to be the son you deserved instead of the one who almost killed you with his problems. I turned around to face him. Then what are you going to do about it? He looked up at me, and for the first time in our conversation, I saw something besides desperation in his eyes. I saw determination. I'm going to get help, real help, not just promises. I found a gambling addiction program that starts next week. He pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It's a 12-week residential program. I'll lose the house while I'm there, but I'll lose it anyway if I don't go. And Ophelia? Ophelia can have Marcus. She can have whatever life she thinks his money will buy her, but she can't have any more of mine. I studied my son's face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd learned to recognize. But what I saw was different. Raw honesty, genuine remorse, and the first flicker of real self-awareness I'd seen from him in years. If you do this, really do this, it doesn't mean we go back to the way things were, I said finally. I won't be your safety net anymore. I won't pay your bills or clean up your messes. I know. And if you relapse, if you lie to me again, if you try to manipulate me into taking care of problems you create, I will walk away permanently. No second chances. Randall nodded, tears still streaming down his face. I understand. I sat back down across from him, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Cautious hope. Then yes, I said quietly. You can have your mom back. But this time, you get the real version. The one who loves you enough to let you fail if that's what it takes for you to succeed. For the first time in months, my son smiled, and it looked genuine. I think I'd like to meet her. 6 months later, I was tending to my small garden behind my apartment building when I heard footsteps on the path. I looked up to see Randall approaching, but this version of my son was almost unrecognizable from the broken man who'd appeared at my door that morning in March. He'd gained back the weight he'd lost during his crisis. His hair was clean and styled, and most importantly, his eyes were clear. He carried himself differently too, straighter, more confident, but without the arrogant edge that had defined him for so many years. Hi, Mom. Hello, Randall. I stood up, brushing soil from my gardening gloves. You look good. I feel good. Really good for the first time in years. He gestured toward my small tomato plants. Need some help with those? I've got it, but thank you. We'd established this pattern over the past few months, small offers of help that I usually declined, not out of spite, but because I genuinely enjoyed doing things for myself. Randall had learned to accept my refusals without argument, recognizing them for what they were, signs of my hard-won independence. How's the new job? I asked, settling onto the small bench I'd bought for my garden space. Randall sat beside me, maintaining the careful distance we'd both learned to navigate. It's good. The pay isn't great, but it's honest work, and my boss says if I keep it up, there might be a supervisor position opening up next year. He was working as a clerk at a hardware store, a job that would have embarrassed him a year ago, but now seemed to give him genuine satisfaction. The manager was a recovered gambling addict himself and had been willing to give Randall a chance based on his completion of the residential program. And the meetings? Still going twice a week. Still working the steps. He paused, looking out at the other small gardens that dotted the apartment complex's backyard. I wanted to tell you, I'm at step 8 now. Step 8, making a list of people harmed by your addiction and becoming willing to make amends to them all. I knew because I'd educated myself about the program when Randall first entered treatment. I'd wanted to understand what he was going through without having to rely on his interpretation of it. That must be a long list, I said gently. It is, but you're at the top of it. He turned to face me. I know I've already apologized, but I want you to know that I understand now what I put you through. Not just the money, but the way I made you feel like you didn't matter, like your only value was what you could do for me. I nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever we talked about those dark months. I appreciate that. The counselor says that making amends isn't just about saying sorry. It's about changing behavior and accepting that some relationships might never be the same. He paused. I want you to know that I understand if you can never fully trust me again. Randall, I said carefully, trust isn't something you get back by asking for it. It's something you earn by being consistent over time. I know, and I'm willing to do the work for as long as it takes. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden. It struck me how different this conversation was from the desperate, manipulative encounters we'd had for so many years. There was no urgency, no hidden agenda, no attempt to extract something from me. Can I ask you something? Randall said eventually. Of course. Are you happy? Really happy, not just relieved to be away from all the chaos? I considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, I would have said I was grateful, or peaceful, or free. But happiness? That had seemed like too much to ask for. Yes, I said, surprised by how easily the word came. I am happy. Good. He smiled, and it was the genuine expression I remembered from his childhood. You deserve to be happy. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it and couldn't help but smile. What is it? Randall asked, noticing my expression. Remember Frank, my landlord? His daughter just had a baby and he's asking if I want to see pictures. You've become close with your landlord? I showed him the photos of a tiny, wrinkled newborn with a shock of dark hair. Frank's become a good friend. He's teaching me how to grow vegetables, and I help him with his computer when he needs to video chat with his grandchildren. It was more than that, though I didn't say so. Frank and I had developed the kind of easy companionship that I'd never thought possible at my age. We weren't romantic. We were both too set in our ways for that, but we were genuine friends who looked out for each other without keeping score. I'm glad you have that, Randall said, and I could tell he meant it. You were alone too much when you were taking care of me. I was alone even when I was with you, I said without thinking, then immediately regretted the harshness of it. But Randall just nodded. Yeah, I know. I'm sorry for that too. My phone buzzed again, this time with a call. The screen showed Sarah Williams, Randall's ex-girlfriend who'd helped me understand the pattern of his manipulation. I should take this, I said, standing up. Sarah? Hi, honey. Della? I hope I'm not interrupting anything. I just wanted to let you know that I got the job. Sarah had been applying for teaching positions after finishing her master's degree, something she'd put on hold during her relationship with Randall, and had only recently found the courage to pursue again. That's wonderful. Which school? The elementary school near downtown, 3rd grade. I start in the fall. Her excitement was infectious, and I found myself beaming. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without your encouragement. Listen, I'm cooking dinner this Sunday to celebrate. Would you like to come? Frank's welcome too, of course. After I hung up, Randall was looking at me with curiosity. Sarah Williams? Yes, we've stayed in touch. She helped you understand what I was doing, didn't she? I nodded. She helped me understand that I wasn't the first person you'd manipulated, that it wasn't personal, and it wasn't my fault. Randall absorbed this quietly. I'm glad she was there for you. I'm glad you have people who care about you for who you are, not what you can do for them. As the sun began to set, Randall stood to leave. We'd established this routine too. Regular visits that had defined endpoints. No lingering. No attempts to extend the time together beyond what felt natural. Mom, before I go, I wanted to tell you something. I drove past the old house last week. My stomach tightened slightly. The house had been sold at auction 4 months ago, with Randall receiving nothing after the mortgage and various debts were paid off. How did that feel? Sad, but not in the way I expected. I wasn't sad about losing the house. I was sad about all the time I wasted there. All the opportunities I threw away to be the kind of son you deserved. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But you know what I realized? Losing that house was the best thing that could have happened to me. It forced me to stop pretending I could keep all the lies going forever. And Ophelia? Still with Marcus, as far as I know. I heard through someone at the program that they moved to his place in the suburbs. Randall shrugged. I hope she's happy. I really do. We were bad for each other, and I'm glad we're both free to figure out who we are without all that toxicity. After he left, I sat in my garden until the stars came out. My phone had a few messages, one from Margaret, my sister, updating me on her grandchildren's latest adventures, one from Mrs. Chen asking if I could come clean her house a day earlier next week, and one from Frank asking if I wanted to watch a movie with him that evening. A year ago, my phone had been a source of anxiety, constantly buzzing with demands and guilt trips from people who saw me as a solution to their problems. Now, it connected me to people who genuinely cared about my well-being. I thought about Randall's question, whether I was truly happy. The answer was more complex than a simple yes or no. I was happy, but it was a different kind of happiness than I'd expected. It wasn't the giddy joy of youth or the satisfaction of achievement. It was something quieter, but more durable. The deep contentment of finally living an authentic life. I'd spent so many years defining myself by how well I could meet other people's needs that I'd forgotten I had needs of my own. Now, at 64, I was discovering who Della Morrison actually was when she wasn't trying to be indispensable to people who took her for granted. She was someone who loved gardening and discovered she had a talent for growing things, someone who enjoyed quiet Sunday mornings with crossword puzzles and good coffee, someone who could laugh at movies with a friend without worrying about anyone else's reaction, someone who deserved respect and kindness, and who was finally strong enough to walk away from situations where those things weren't offered. The house phone I'd bought for my apartment rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Frank. Hey, Della, I just put some popcorn in the microwave. You still up for that movie? I looked around my small garden, at the tomatoes I'd grown myself, at the comfortable life I'd built from nothing but determination and self-respect. I'll be right down, I said. As I gathered my gardening tools and headed inside, I thought about the woman who'd left that other house in the middle of the night 8 months ago. She'd been broken, exhausted, and desperate. She'd also been braver than she knew. That woman had saved my life. And now, finally, I was living it. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.